Shabbat Shalom. Wow. So there is actually, I believe, a profound lesson that we can learn from the winter that we are currently experiencing, right? It's almost 4 weeks since the big snowstorm, right, before 4 weeks tomorrow, and that snow then turned to snowcrete, which is a term that I had never heard before. But if you tried to shovel it more than a couple of hours after the precipitation stopped, snowcrete was a good term, right? And schools were shut down for over a week, and we're finally at a point where the snow has mostly melted, right? And I am not backing out of my garage and then my car is like this for a while, right? Because there still is, that's gone, but there are still cars that are snowed in, right? That clearly have not been moved for a month or since before the storm, but tomorrow, another storm. Maybe, right? And I will tell you that I am checking the weather app on my phone all the time. All the time, because on Tuesday, I am driving a family from Gaithersburg to the immigration court in Hyattsville. And if I can't get them there, that's bad for them. No skin off my nose, but it's bad for them. So I really need to be able to get them there. So I'm checking the weather report. Why? Because we like to feel that we are in control, right? And for whatever bizarre reason, because like intellectually I know that it's not true, right? But I feel that checking my weather report gives me some control, right? But let me let you in on a little secret, okay? The weather that's gonna happen is going to happen, right? And my checking the weather on my phone, I mean, I don't know, might create a tiny bit more global warming, but other than that, what?
Butterfly, that was checked.
Well, yeah, but really...
But all the funding's been taken out of NOAA, so it's not going to be a good prediction.
What?
You do have some things to your control, because if you see it's going to be bad, you might be able to get them to a hotel closer there.
No, there are other things I can do. There are definitely things I can do, like, yes, get them to a hotel before. I don't know if that's going to happen, but let them know that instead of leaving at 6:30, we might leave at 6, etc. Right? There are things I can do, but controlling the weather is not one of them, right? But you know, we want to be in control, right? And let me let you in on another secret vis-a-vis the weather predictions, particularly in this area. Nobody knows nothing, right? Nobody knows nothing, but whatever's going to happen is going to happen, but we don't like that. And we want to have control, but the illusion that we can have complete control over our environment, it's an illusion. And more than that, I actually believe it borders on idolatry. Because the Jewish definition of idolatry is to ascribe divine properties to things that do not actually have divine properties, right? And if I feel that I can control my environment, I am ascribing, in essence, divine properties to myself, right? Which is idolatry, right? But this week's Parsha, right? And I mentioned, in my introduction, the 3 Parsha arc that I believe is there. But even within the Parsha, how does it begin? To take an offering as much as each person's heart prompts them to give, right? And that's pretty odd, right? Because most mitzvot don't say, however much you feel like, right? They're very specific, right? And most years, actually not this year because the way the calendar is, we read it last year, but there's the first of the special maftir readings leading up to Pesach is Shekalim, right? And Shekalim tells you every adult male gives half a shekel. No more and no less, right? And in general, right, if you did this sin, so you bring this sacrifice, right? But here it's like whatever your heart prompts you to give, that's what you give. And it's extremely unusual, right? But, okay, so it's a free will offering, which means give as much as you feel like, but it doesn't mean it doesn't mean nothing, but it also doesn't mean whatever you feel like, right? Bring as much as you want of these very specific things, right? Actually, come to think of it, reminds me of the Christmas brunch, right? For the homeless shelter, right? Well, very specific things. Don't bring whatever you feel like. Bring these things. How much? Much as you feel that you're capable of, right? And this parsha, and then next several parshiot, very detailed instructions for the construction of the whole edifice, right? So there's no chance that somebody's going to bring something weird, right? Like, oh, I have a lot of orange wool. I'll bring orange wool. And the architects will have to figure out how to incorporate the orange wool, or else I'm going to be offended, right? It's like, we should have that rule, do not bring your rabbi paintings to the shul, right? We don't want your rabbi paintings, right? We don't want them, we don't need them. There's nothing that we can do with them, right? You are just creating a burden for us. We appreciate your goodwill and your desire to help. Figure out a way to turn your rabbi paintings into cash and bring the cash, right? No more rabbi paintings. If you have a Rembrandt original, bring that. That's fine. Okay? If you happen to have a Rembrandt original rabbi painting, bring it.
That was not my point. My point was the value of the rabbi painting depends upon who the rabbi is or was. Don't comment.
Maybe. I'm more interested in who painted it. Okay? Do you remember before there were cell phones? Right? Do you remember? There once was and I have to tell you, I had a conversation this summer with a young man, just graduated college, works, or at the time, for the enterprise office on Frederick Road. did not realize that there was a time before smartphones. Did not realize, okay? Because if you're 23 years old, right, like as long as you can remember, there have been smartphones, right? More or less. I mean, but I think to myself often, like, how did we do anything? Right? How did we do anything? I mean, how did I find out how to get somewhere? Right? Or how did I make plans to meet up with somebody? And how did I find out, like, what restaurants there are in this town that I've never been to? Right? And what do they serve? I mean, how did we function before
Paper.
cell phones? What? Paper, but
Phone books.
phone books, right? Phone book, and then you had to call them, and then you had to speak to somebody, right? Which for some of us is not like something we like, right? It's, how did we? But apparently we did function before cell phones, because I remember the first time I was in a room full of people and everybody was checking their phone. Okay, it was the winter of 2011. I lived in Connecticut. I was in New York City for a fellowship called Rabbis Without Borders, competitive fellowship that was to educate rabbis in the general trends of American and world society, and an ice storm was threatening, and are we going to be able to get home, right? So check the weather report, and check, in my case, Amtrak, are the trains still running? And in other people's case, check the airlines, are the, right? And I took account, 25 out of the 26 people in that room had smartphones, okay? And that was like the point at which smartphones were pretty much ubiquitous saturation, right? And now, of course, it's like, I'm really cool, I don't have a smartphone, right? People think they're cool because they don't have one, right? But back then, you were, right, everybody had one, right? So, and then finally, the sponsor of Rabbi, they said, look, we understand you're going to have trouble getting home. If you got to stay an extra day, an extra 2 days, we'll pay for the hotel, right? And that, at least for me, that solved the problem, right? And in retrospect, the hardest part of the journey home was getting from the New London train station to my car in the garage at the New London train station, which was on the 4th floor and the elevator was out. Okay, but, I got home. But I would also say that talking about like not being in control, so we began our meeting with a session from a very high official from Goldman Sachs, and he spent 2 hours explaining to us how the financial meltdown of September 2008 occurred, right? And his explanation, I'm glad I'm amusing you, okay?
Robert spent a lot of time
I'm
at work that week dealing with all
I'm
this
sure that he did.
bankruptcy court and stuff.
I'm sure that he did, right? But it was interesting and it was thorough. And one of the things I find fascinating, when people who have like a highly technical profession have to explain it to other people, right? Which rabbis have to do, right? And doctors have to do, right? And this guy was trying to explain, and you could see that it was a challenge for him to explain what happened or his perception of what happened to people who were not in that field, okay? But here was his bottom line. No one could have predicted what happened because never before in U.S. history had housing lost so much value so quickly. Housing always goes up in value, always. And if the borrower defaults on the mortgage, you still have the asset, right? And so lenders knew that there was credit risk, but not asset risk, right? You used to be able to say this along with me, right? A collapse of housing values never occurs and cannot occur. And therefore, everybody was caught off guard when something which cannot occur and never occurs occurred, right? I found this a little frustrating, right? Because if something is no one's fault, right, and no one did anything wrong, there's no way to prevent it from happening again. What?
Sure there is.
What?
Like your spouse does it every day.
Okay, but nobody did anything wrong, right? Nobody, I mean,
He would argue with you about that.
so would I. But this, remember, Goldman Sachs, right? Goldman Sachs, not God on high, even though Goldman Sachs may think it's God, right? But from the perspective of Goldman, nobody did anything wrong. And I'm saying if nobody did anything wrong, how do you prevent it from happening again? But having said that, sometimes things really do go wrong, and it isn't anybody's fault, right? And I also kind of live by the motto that assigning blame isn't the same thing as fixing the problem, right? The question when you're in a mess is not who did this, it's how do we fix it, right? But the building and the construction of the tabernacle, it contrasts fundamentally with life as we know it. We want to impose order on our surrounding, and we want to create predictability, not randomness, right? And technology has allowed us to do this more than ever. But because of that reason, it's all the more frustrating when we can't do it, right? Because we've been encouraged to feel that every problem has an easy solution, right? And in the Jewish world, this is rampant, okay? It was birthright Israel, and then it was Havurot, and it's like there's always like the latest thing that this is going to save American Judaism, right? And it's like we're always looking for that magic bullet because we believe that every problem has an easy solution. And as Americans, we feel that we have a constitutional right never to have anything bad happen to us. And if something bad happens to us, who do we sue, right? But, that's just not the way the world is. Bad stuff happens, right? And we don't have control, and moreover, it's hard to get stuff right. It really is, right? And I've quoted many times Chancellor Emeritus Arnie Eisen from JTS, his insight on the role of ritual. That ritual in our lives gives us something that we can get right in a world where we rarely get anything completely right. Okay, so the tabernacle was that place where you could gain a glimpse and feel order in the world, Because the very definition of order, God rested in the tabernacle and we could feel God's presence, right? And once we leave, we're back into the chaos, right? But having glimpsed order, that there is actually a possibility of order and predictability in the world, and having experienced that, we know that it's possible, and that vision of order and predictability is what we mean, I think, by the Messianic era. Shabbat shalom.